Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Today's story is about a woman who is hurt by the two people she trusts most, and how an unexpected bond helps her rebuild her life. A deeply emotional and powerful story is waiting for you. If you're ready, let's begin. The worst part wasn't finding them together. The worst part was that for one single, stupid second, I thought the sounds coming from Dylan's bedroom meant he was watching something on his phone. I actually knocked on the door first. I knocked, like a polite idiot who still believed the world was decent and people were worth trusting. And then I opened it. I won't describe exactly what I saw. My mind has spent 3 months trying to blur the image, and I'm not going to sharpen it back up for the sake of the story. What I'll tell you is this. The girl in Dylan's bed was wearing a pink scrunchie around her wrist. A pink scrunchie I had given Cassie for her birthday 2 years ago. I recognized it before I recognized her face. That detail alone nearly folded me in half. Her name was Cassandra Vidal. Cassie, my best friend since the 9th grade, the girl who held my hair back when I cried over my grandmother's funeral and helped me memorize every Spanish verb tense and screamed into a pillow with me when we both got into the same university. 6 years of sleepovers and secrets and inside jokes that nobody else would ever understand. And she was in Dylan's bed on a Wednesday afternoon while I was supposed to be at a study group that ended an hour early. Dylan said my name. He said it the way people say the name of something they've broken. Like they already know no apology is going to fix it. Cassie didn't say anything. She just looked at me with these wide, wet eyes and pulled the sheet up to her chin. And somehow that gesture, that small, reflexive attempt at modesty, made it all so much more real and so much more unbearable at the same time. I didn't scream. I thought I would. I'd always imagined that if something like this happened to me, I'd be the type to scream, or throw things, or say something devastatingly sharp that they'd never forget. Instead, I just stood there in the doorway for what felt like a full minute, holding the container of leftover pasta I'd brought to share with Dylan because I thought we were having a quiet evening in. I set the pasta down on the hallway table outside his door. Very carefully, like it mattered. Then I turned around and walked out of the apartment. I made it to the stairwell before my knees stopped cooperating. I sat on the cold concrete steps for 20 minutes, shaking so hard my teeth chattered. Not from cold. From the kind of internal earthquake that happens when two of the people you trusted most in the world collapse at the same time. I kept thinking about small things. The way Cassie had been slightly distant for the last month. The way Dylan had stopped initiating plans. The way I'd told myself both of those things were just life, just stress, just the natural ebb of relationships that had been together for almost 2 years. I had explained away every sign because I was so committed to believing that the people I loved would never do that to me. By the time I got back to my own apartment, I had about 4 texts from Dylan and 2 from Cassie. I read none of them. I turned my phone face down on my kitchen counter, sat on the bathroom floor, and let myself cry until I had nothing left. The days that followed were their own particular kind of ugly. I went to class on autopilot, answered emails with complete grammatical correctness, and ate whatever was in my refrigerator without tasting it. My roommate Priya noticed something was wrong by day 2, and when I told her what happened, she sat on the edge of my bed and held both my hands and didn't say anything for a while, which was exactly what I needed. She didn't tell me things happen for a reason, or that I was better off without them. She just held my hands and let me feel it. Dylan showed up at my apartment on the 4th day. I didn't let him in, but I stood in the doorway and listened to him talk because some part of me needed to see what he'd say. He said it hadn't meant anything. He said Cassie had been going through something difficult, and it just happened, as if the two of them had tripped and fallen into a situation that wasn't anybody's fault. He said he still loved me and he wanted to fix this and he was willing to do whatever it took. I looked at him for a long moment. Dylan was handsome in the kind of way that's easy to get used to. Medium height, dark hair that curled at his ears, the smile that had made me say yes to a first date 18 months ago. Standing in my doorway, looking guilty and desperate, he looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. Not shorter, just reduced somehow. Like the version of him I'd been in love with had been a projection, and the real thing was thinner and less substantial than I'd thought. I told him I needed him to leave. He asked if we could talk later in the week. I said I didn't know. He left. Cassie didn't come to me in person, which told me something important about what our friendship had actually been. She sent a long text that I read once and never opened again. I don't remember most of what it said. I remember the word complicated appearing 3 times. I deleted her number. What I didn't expect, what nobody warns you about when a relationship ends this way, is the specific loneliness of losing your best friend and your boyfriend at the same time. Breakups are supposed to have survivors. You're supposed to be able to call someone after, someone who knew both of you, someone who was there. But Cassie had been that person for every hard thing in my life. Losing her alongside Dylan felt like losing the emergency contact and the emergency at the same time. I was out here in the open with nothing to hold on to. It was Priya who eventually got me out of the apartment. She dragged me to a birthday party for a girl in her program, someone I barely knew, at a rented event space near the river that was too loud and too warm and full of people who didn't know I was broken. I drank 1 glass of wine and stood near the windows and watched the lights on the water and told myself repeatedly that I was fine and that this was normal and that people survived worse. That was the first time I saw Raina. She was standing near the far end of the room, apart from the main crowd, holding a glass of something dark, wearing a structured black blazer over a silk top, and she was not smiling. Not in a hostile way. More in the way of someone who has decided that a room full of noise is not worth the energy of performing enjoyment. She was older, maybe 30, maybe a little past it, with dark hair pulled back sharply, strong features, and the kind of posture that made the space around her feel organized, like even the air near her stood up straighter. I didn't know who she was. I only found out an hour later when Dylan, who I had not known would be there, who I suspect someone invited without telling me, appeared at my elbow with that same small, guilty look and said, "Hey, Maya, my cousin Raina is here. You should say hi." I stared at him. Why would I say hi to your cousin, Dylan? He had the grace to look uncomfortable. She knows about what happened. She thinks I'm an idiot. He almost smiled, then seemed to realize that was the wrong response and stopped himself. She's good people. I wanted you to know you don't have to avoid the room because of me. I told him very calmly that I wasn't avoiding anything and that he should go stand somewhere else. He did. But now I knew who the woman in the blazer was, and I found myself looking at her again across the room with a different kind of attention. Dylan's cousin. She already knew. She'd called him an idiot. Something about that small piece of information made me feel a fraction less alone in a room full of strangers. She caught me looking at her. I expected her to glance away. She didn't. She held my gaze for a moment with an expression that I couldn't decode. Not unfriendly, not warm, just steady and direct. And then she looked back at her drink. My heart did something strange in my chest. I told myself it was the wine. We didn't speak that night. I left before midnight and walked back to the apartment in the October air with my hands in my coat pockets and kept thinking about the way she'd looked at me. Steady, like she'd already decided something about me and was waiting to see if I'd confirm it. I dreamed about a woman in a black blazer that night and woke up confused and annoyed with myself. The second time I saw Raina was 12 days later, and this time it was not a party. It was Dylan's family's restaurant on a Sunday afternoon, his aunt's birthday lunch, which I absolutely should not have attended, and I would not have attended if Priya hadn't accidentally booked it as the venue for her mother's birthday lunch on the same day without realizing the connection. It was a mess of coincidence and bad timing, and I spent 20 minutes in the parking lot seriously considering just going back home. Priya talked me into staying. She said it was a large place and we wouldn't have to interact with anyone. She was not wrong about the size. She was wrong about the not interacting. I was waiting near the host station for our table when I heard a voice beside me say, "Maya." It wasn't a question. It was just my name, stated like a fact, in a voice that was low and clear and carried an authority I could not explain. I turned. Raina was standing 2 feet away, looking at me with those same unhurried, dark eyes, still wearing something structured, this time a deep green dress that fit her like it had been made specifically for her measurements. Up close, she was more striking than I'd realized at the party. She had fine lines at the corners of her eyes and a slight severity in her brow that softened the longer she looked at you. "You're Maya," she said. "I'm Raina. We almost met at Isla's party." "Your cousin pointed you out," I said carefully. "He told me." Something shifted in her expression. Something that might have been sympathy, or might have been the careful kind of disapproval she didn't feel the need to announce loudly. "I'm sorry about what he did. He has the emotional self-awareness of a potted plant." I laughed before I could stop myself. It was a real laugh, sudden and a little startled, and it felt strange in my throat because I hadn't done it in a while. Yeah, that's accurate. "Are you here for the Delgado party?" She glanced past me. "My friend booked the private room. Coincidence?" "Unfortunate coincidence." Pretty much every coincidence lately is unfortunate. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "The family is in the East dining room. I'll make sure nobody bothers you." She said it like a statement of fact, and not like an offer, like she'd already decided this was happening and was informing me of the arrangements. I didn't know what to do with that. "You don't have to do that." "I know," she said, and walked away toward the East dining room. I stood there watching her go and tried to identify what I was feeling. It wasn't gratitude exactly, though it was adjacent to that. It was something more like the strange relief of having someone competent standing between you and the thing that hurt you, even if that someone was nearly a stranger. Priya appeared at my elbow. "Who was that?" "Dylan's cousin." Priya looked in the direction Raina had gone. "Wow. Don't." "I'm just saying." "Priya. She's just very—" "Don't." She didn't, but she was smiling, which was somehow worse. Nobody from the family came to bother us during the lunch. I don't know if Raina said something or if it was coincidence again. I told myself it was coincidence. I told myself a lot of things that afternoon that I didn't quite believe. The third encounter happened because I made it happen, and I think that's the part I need to be honest about. Dylan had left a box of my things at his apartment. A sweater, some books, a phone charger I'd bought specifically to keep there. He texted me about it and suggested leaving it with his aunt. I could have just let him drop it at my building, but I said I'd pick it up from his aunt's place, and I told myself it was because I didn't want him at my door again, and that was true, but it was not the whole truth. Raina answered the door. She was wearing reading glasses, pushed up on her head, and holding a pen. And she looked briefly, genuinely surprised to see me, which was the first time I'd seen any crack in that composed exterior. "Maya. I'm here for a box. Dylan left some things." "I know. Come in." She stepped back from the door and I stepped inside. The apartment, her apartment, I realized, not the aunt's, was organized with the precision of someone who did not tolerate disorder. Books arranged by size, a kitchen counter that had nothing on it that didn't belong there, a half-finished document open on a laptop at the dining table. She went to a side table near the entrance and picked up a small box. "He dropped it off yesterday." "Thank you." I took it. We were standing close in the small entryway, and I was aware of her height, just slightly taller than me, and the way she smelled like cedar and something warm underneath it. "How are you actually doing?" she said, not with upward inflection, not as a polite question, the same way she said everything, like she meant it and expected an honest answer. I opened my mouth to say, "Fine," which was what I said to everyone, and what came out instead was, "Some days are better than others." "Yesterday was not one of the better ones." She nodded, slow, like she was filing that away. "Do you have somewhere to be?" I glanced at the box in my hands, at the laptop behind her. "You're working." "I'm always working. That doesn't mean you have to leave." I stayed for 2 hours. I don't know entirely how it happened. She made tea without asking if I wanted any, and put it in front of me and went back to her document, and I sat at her dining table with my box beside me and felt, for the first time in weeks, like I didn't have to be okay. She didn't ask me to perform recovery. She just let me exist in the room while she worked. Occasionally, she said something dry and precise about Dylan that made me laugh. Occasionally, I asked about the document she was editing, and she explained it. She was a contracts attorney, she worked too much, she found most social situations tedious and negotiation situations invigorating, and she said all of this without apology. I walked home that evening, feeling lighter than I had in a month. I also felt, for the first time, the specific weight of a feeling I was not ready to name. The problem was that it kept happening. We started running into each other, and then running into each other started to feel less like coincidence and more like something we were both, separately, engineering. She texted me once about a restaurant she thought I'd like. Nothing else, just the name and the address and an observation that their lunch menu was underrated. I went alone, and she was right, and I texted her back just the word correct, and she responded with a single punctuation mark that somehow communicated more amusement than a paragraph could have. I started looking forward to my phone in a way I hadn't expected. She came to my side of the city one evening for a work dinner and texted me on her way out to see if I wanted to get coffee nearby. We sat in a corner of a small cafe for 3 hours and talked about everything and nothing, her work, my thesis, the architecture of disappointment, why some people mistake familiarity for love. She said something that night that stayed with me for a long time. She said that most people have never experienced the difference between a relationship that is comfortable and a relationship that is true, and they confuse one for the other until they can't anymore. I looked at her across the small table and thought about Dylan, about how easy it had been to be with him, how familiar and frictionless, how I had mistaken the absence of difficulty for the presence of love. "Have you?" I asked. "Experienced the difference?" She was quiet for a moment. "Once, a long time ago." She picked up her cup. "I've been more careful since then." "Careful sounds lonely." Something moved across her face, not quite pain, but in that neighborhood. "It can be." We sat with that for a moment, just the two of us in the warm noise of the cafe, and I felt the air between us change into something denser, something that required acknowledgement, and neither of us was quite ready to give it. I went home that night and sat on my bed and looked at the ceiling and said out loud to nobody, "This is a terrible idea," and then felt my face do something against my will that might have been called smiling. The complication arrived on a Friday night in November when I was at a mutual friends gathering, the same circles that always seemed to loop us back toward each other, and Dylan was there. And this time, he was standing too close to Cassie in a corner of the kitchen, and they were laughing at something in the specific way of people who have decided they are not hiding anything anymore. It hit me harder than I expected. Not because I wanted Dylan back. I had gotten remarkably clear on not wanting Dylan back. It hit me because of what it meant about Cassie. The way she looked, comfortable, almost defiant, told me that she hadn't lost any sleep about what she'd done. That the friendship I'd mourned, that I had genuinely grieved, had not carried the same weight for her that it had carried for me. That was the knife that still turned. I stepped outside onto the small balcony with my drink and stayed there in the November cold for a long time. The door opened behind me, and I already knew from the sound of the footsteps, measured and unhurried, who it was. Raina stood beside me at the railing. She looked through the glass door at her cousin and Cassie in the kitchen. Her expression was composed, but something around her eyes was sharp. "I wasn't sure you'd be here tonight." "Neither was I said. "Do you want to leave?" I looked at her. It would feel like running away. There's a difference between running away and choosing not to subject yourself to something that causes you pain. She said it without gentleness and without cruelty, just as information. Nobody earns your presence just by existing in a room. I turned back to the view of the street below. Cars moving slowly, lights blurring in the cold. "She looks fine," Cassie, she looks completely fine. Yes. We were best friends for 6 years. I know. And she looks like it was nothing. Raina was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Some people are capable of caring about other people only within the limits of what it costs them. The moment the cost goes up, they renegotiate." She paused. She was never your best friend. She was playing a version of friendship that served her. The grief you feel is real. What you lost is real. But you're not mourning her. You're mourning the person you believed she was, and that person never quite existed. I stared at the street for a long time. My throat felt tight. That should feel like comfort. It doesn't feel like comfort. It's not comfort, she said. It's just true. Truth and comfort are different things. I looked at her then. Really looked at her. The way I'd been careful not to for the last several weeks. The way I'd been managing and rationalizing and categorizing so that it wouldn't become too real. She was looking at the street, not at me. The cold had raised a slight flush in her cheeks. A strand of her pinned hair had come loose and was trailing at her jaw. She looked human in a way she didn't always allow herself to, standing here on this balcony with me, speaking honestly into the dark. I said her name. She turned her head. I said, "I don't know what this is, between us, but I think about it more than I should." Something in her face changed. The steadiness that was always there was still there, but underneath it, something moved, something it looked like she had been holding in a clenched fist for a while. "Maya, I know you're careful. I'm careful for good reasons. I know. And you're not, this is not the right time for you to, I know that too." I held her gaze. "I'm not asking for anything. I'm just being honest with you. You said truth and comfort are different things. So this is just truth." She looked at me for a long moment. The strand of hair moved in the wind between us. She said quietly, "I think about it too." I exhaled something I hadn't realized I was holding. "But," she said, with the precision that was so entirely her, "not like this. Not on a balcony at someone else's party while Dylan and Cassie are in the kitchen. That's not what either of us needs this to be. If it's going to be anything, it should be chosen clearly, not reacted into." I nodded. She was right. I hated how right she was. "Then what do we do?" "Go back inside," she said. "Get your coat, I'll get mine, we'll leave, separately, through the front door. And on Thursday evening, if you'd like, you can come to my apartment for dinner. Not as a coincidence. Not as a continuation of the mess of the last 2 months. As a choice." She said it the way she said everything, like it was simply the next correct thing to do, already decided, waiting for me to confirm. I said, "Thursday." She nodded once, turned back to the door, paused with her hand on the frame and said, without looking at me, "For what it's worth, 6 years or not, anyone who could do what she did was never worth the grief." Then she went inside, and a moment later I saw her through the glass moving toward the coats, unhurried, composed, like she hadn't just changed something fundamental about the next chapter of my life. I stayed on the balcony for another minute. The cold was sharp and clean against my face. Below, the city went on making its ordinary noise. Somewhere inside, Dylan was laughing at something Cassie said, and for the first time I found I didn't feel the knife when I thought about them. I felt a strange, unfamiliar thing that took me a moment to identify. Distance. Real distance. The kind that comes not from numbing, but from genuinely beginning to move in a different direction. I went inside and got my coat. Thursday arrived with the particular weight of something that matters. I changed my outfit 3 times, which I recognized as absurd, and did it anyway. I stood at Raina's door at 7 o'clock, exactly holding a bottle of wine I'd spent far too long choosing in the shop, and told myself to breathe. She opened the door in a dark gray sweater and dark slacks with her hair down. Not completely down, twisted and pinned loosely so that it fell a little at her shoulders. And the sight of her outside of the blazers and the composed professional armor was like seeing a different layer of the same person. Warmer underneath. Quieter. She looked at the wine and then at me and said, "You look nervous." I am nervous. You don't need to be. That's easy to say from where you're standing. A small smile. The real kind, not the polite social kind. Come in. She had cooked. Properly cooked. Something with herbs and slow warmth that filled the apartment and made it feel like an entirely different space from the organized, purposeful place I'd sat in before. We ate at the kitchen table, which was set properly, and she poured the wine, and we talked the way we always talked, which was with that particular ease I'd never found with anyone else. The ease of two people who think at similar speeds and don't have to cushion everything for the other person. At some point during the meal, I said something about how strange it was that the person who'd helped me most through the worst months of my life was the cousin of the person who'd started those months. She set her fork down carefully. Is that how you see this? Me helping you? Isn't it? I think, she said slowly, that I have been selfish in this. I wasn't kind to you on those balconies and in those coffee shops because I was trying to heal you, Maya. I was kind to you because I wanted to be near you. That's not entirely altruistic. She looked at me steadily. I want you to understand that it hasn't been charity on my end. My heart was doing that thing again. The thing I'd stopped trying to argue away. I know it hasn't. Do you? Raina. I put my own fork down. I stopped thinking about Dylan by the second week of October. I haven't thought about Cassie with grief in a month. I think about you. I think about the specific way you look at people when you're deciding whether or not they're worth trusting. And I think about the fact that somewhere in there you decided I was. And I find that more significant than anything I felt with Dylan across 2 years. She was quiet for what felt like a long time. The apartment made small sounds around us. Somewhere outside, rain had started, barely audible, tapping at the window. She said, "You are not easy to be careful around." I said, "Don't be careful." She looked at me, and the thing I'd been watching build behind those composed dark eyes for 2 months arrived fully at the surface. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine, and it was such a simple gesture, just her hand on mine. But the deliberateness of it, the sheer clear intention in it, was more powerful than anything I'd experienced in all the drama of the last year. We stayed like that for a moment, looking at each other across the table with the rain outside and the warm light overhead. And then she said, low and serious and entirely herself, "I have not done this in a long time, and I am not careless with people. So if we do this, I need you to understand that I take it seriously." So do I. You're 24. Almost 25. The corner of her mouth moved. That distinction matters enormously. Raina. I know. She turned her hand over, slowly, so that instead of covering mine, she was holding it. I just wanted to say it, so that you know I've considered everything, and I'm still sitting here. I know you have, I said. You're the most deliberate person I've ever met. Is that a complaint? It's the opposite. She looked at me for a moment, and then she did something I hadn't seen before. She let go of the composure, the watchfulness, the careful architecture of self-control she'd been maintaining since the night I knocked on her door to pick up a box of my own belongings. She just let me see her. The tiredness behind the steadiness, the warmth she kept underneath the reserve, the way her face softened when she stopped managing it. She looked younger and older all at once, and more real than anything. I leaned across the table and I kissed her. It was brief, soft, the kind of first kiss that is mostly a question. And when I pulled back, she was looking at me with the particular expression of someone who had been waiting for something longer than they'd realized. She brought her free hand up to the side of my face and held it there, just for a moment, just to be sure. And then she kissed me back, and it was nothing like a question. It tasted like the wine and the evening and everything the last 2 months had been moving toward. Winter settled into the city with the kind of unhurried certainty that reminded me of Raina herself. We did not rush anything. That was partly her nature and partly mine now. I'd arrived at this from a wreck, and I didn't want to rebuild something reckless on the rubble. We took our time, long dinners at her apartment and Saturday walks in the cold and late evenings talking about things neither of us had said out loud to anyone in years. She had her reserve, and I had mine, and we were patient with each other's locked doors. That was new to me. Dylan had never been patient with anything. He'd wanted the full performance of a relationship immediately. The couplehood, the labels, the announcement, without ever building the actual substance underneath. Raina cared about the substance. She called me out when I was performing okay instead of being it. She was direct about what she needed and what she wouldn't accept. And the clarity of that was something I had not understood I was starved for. I'd spent 2 years softening myself to fit into Dylan's idea of what a girlfriend should be. With Raina, I was just myself, the full version, and she looked at that version like it was exactly the right one. The last time I saw Dylan and Cassie together was at a mutual friend's engagement party in January. I had known they'd be there. I went anyway, with Raina beside me. She wore a deep burgundy dress and her hair down fully, and she walked into that room like she owned the temperature inside it, and I felt, walking next to her, something I had not felt in a long time. Not just happiness, though there was happiness. Something steadier. The feeling of being in the right place, next to the right person, after a very long wrong turn. Dylan saw us from across the room. I watched him register it, the slight stiffening, the look that crossed his face, complicated and resigned. Cassie was beside him, and she saw it too. Her expression was harder to read. I don't know if she felt guilt or just discomfort. I found, looking at her, that I didn't particularly need to know. The grief I'd carried for that friendship had finally, quietly, set itself down. Not because it stopped being real, but because I'd found something that was more real, and there was simply no room to carry both. Raina put her hand at the small of my back as we moved through the room. Light, warm, entirely deliberate. I didn't look back. The night of the engagement party, I said, standing with her in my kitchen while we made tea too late to be drinking it, that I hadn't understood before what it was supposed to feel like, to be genuinely chosen, not picked because you were available or familiar or comfortable, chosen because someone looked at who you actually were and decided, yes, this person, this specific one. Raina set her mug down and turned to look at me with that particular attention she gave the things that mattered. She said, "You've always deserved that. You just had to wait until someone with sense came along." I laughed. That's a very Raina way to say something romantic. Would you prefer it differently? No, I said. I prefer it exactly like this. She stepped toward me and tucked the loose strand of hair behind my ear, the one that always fell forward no matter what I did with it, the one she'd taken to fixing like it was a natural extension of being near me. She held my face in her hands and looked at me with those dark, unhurried eyes, and I thought about all the things that had to break before this could exist. The bad relationship, and the worst betrayal, and the months of grief, and the balcony in November, and the box of my own belongings on a side table near a door. It all led here, to this kitchen, this woman, this specific evening. "Thank you for not being afraid of me," she said softly. "You're only frightening until you're not," I told her. She kissed me, slow and sure and warm. Outside, the January cold pressed at the windows. Inside, in the small circle of light and warmth we had made for ourselves, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And this time, I knew the difference. Thank you for spending this story with GL Audio Story. If it stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it.